name's Dave with Taboo Customs. This is part 2 of our front suspension videos for our M715 here. Now, if you haven't checked out the first video for us, that's where we install our 3-link front suspension from Arctech, all of the links and everything there and all the bracketry. And then we also installed our Fox coilovers and built and designed our upper and lower mounting brackets for those coilovers. Now in the second video, we're going to be covering some of the other things we're going to be adding to this axle, the sway bar that we're going to be using, the bump stops we'll be using, and then also the steering link setup that we'll be using. We'll be installing those and talking more about why we selected these and how they worked out. So the first thing we'll look at is the sway bar. For the sway bar, we are using from the Hortons Welder series, a sway bar that they have available, and they have a lot of do-it-yourself stuff available, mainly for hot rods and different things, but it will apply to this. And they have a lot of options, which is the good thing if you're trying to figure out how to, build something very custom like this. So for ours, we've already got our bar mounted here. Here's the sway bar, actual main bar that goes across the vehicle. For ours, we selected the pillow block style bushings, bearings. You can get others with the tube, with the sleeve and bushings and different things. But the main thing for ours is we needed it pulled up as far as we could here, and we didn't have much clearance between the steering box and where we wanted the sway bar. So we really kind of wanted the sway bar underneath this cross member here for good, rigidity in the frame and all that good stuff. So we've got that located, and then with the sway bar kit, it comes with these, I believe, 17-inch long arms. We'll actually end up welding this bushing to that. That bushing then goes on here, gets drilled and pinned into place, because this is essentially made so that you could cut it to lengths. It just happens to work out that the length they sent is perfect for us. And then this bar, you can see, really long bar to get out there over that front axle. And then this is actually the link. Now, obviously, that link isn't necessarily going to work to have that bar, because you want that sway bar pretty much parallel at ride height. But what this is a pretty good bushing. We're actually going to cut this in half. Actually, we have tube that this will fit down in, and then we'll be able to weld it. We can essentially make this sway bar link as long as we want it. That way we can make sure that we keep that bar parallel. Now we're going to be installing this in conjunction with our steering system as well, because one of the things we have to be careful of is, of course, as we go down with our links, we don't want the tie rod to be able to come into contact with that. So we're going to have to be cognizant of that. So next year we'll be taking a look at what we're doing for our steering links. Now for the steering setup, let's talk about, so we have the GM 10-bolt axle under here. The original way the steering was set up is to have a tie rod going across. There was an arm that came off of here, and the drag link that connected to the steering box was connected to this driver's side knuckle here. Now, we obviously don't have that same setup. We've got to run our drag link over to the passenger side knuckle. And now we thought about trying to, replace the passenger side knuckle, do something similar over here. But the problem is as you look over there, you can kind of see maybe that the track bar mount is right up in that area where that drag link would have to be. Be very, very difficult to go around it probably. More likely would not have the height. So what we've opted to do is then now go with a Y-link setup, where we will have our tie rod, which will be basically these two ends running across, and also the benefit to using these GM basic GM ends, and I'll show you a second here the part numbers, is that they will already fit the taper in the axle, so we don't have to necessarily worry about that. Now what we will have to do though is we will have to create a Y-link, so which means that this hole right here will have to be reamed out to basically accept the other tie rod end coming down from the drag link. Now we bought this kit on eBay, and there's multiple different types and multiple different kits available. But if you are doing this, make sure that you get a decent tapered ream that came with this kit, and make sure you get all of the links. And also what we've got here is to connect them. We'll basically use tube, and we've got our bungs here that will thread onto the tie rod ends so that we can get everything set up. But basically the first thing we need to do is get both this left tie rod end and then also our pitman arm reamed out to accept these GM 1-ton tie rod ends. All right, real quick, the part numbers on these. So for the left tie rod end, we're actually going to use an ES2233L. Now for the right tie rod end, I showed this a little bit off, but this is actually going to be the right tie rod end, ES2010R. The right drag length will actually be what we showed up there, the ES2026R. Left drag length end will be the ES2027L. Before moving on to the reaming, let's talk just another second about these tie rod ends. Now, the taper on the drag link ends here versus the taper on these ends we're going to use for the tie rod is slightly different. So if we put these in here, put our castle nut on here, you can see this knuckle is already drilled for these tie rod ends, which is different than if we look at these ones we're going to use for the drag link. I believe it has the same taper, it's just a little bit larger, however, so these necessarily wouldn't work. So when we go and drill these, the pitman arm and this other tie rod end out, we need to make sure we base it off of this and not off of those, because we'd end up set up for failure. So what we did is we went and we measured because we want this tapered section to be what is mainly up in there. So we want the small end of the taper probably to be just slightly smaller than that size there. So we went and measured that, and that is a 0.72 right there. So what we're actually going to go do first is we'll take this and the pitman arm, and we will actually drill these out first as big as we can, but be under our smallest taper measurement that we want. That will help us save some wear and tear on the ream for the taper, because these will wear out fairly quick. You'll see we'll use some coolant, probably some thread cutting oil as well, to try to make sure that we can get these cut before that wears out, and hope we don't have to buy a second one. All right, we're going to start with the tie rod end. Of course, we're going to first start drilling it out to 5/8 because that's the closest drill bit we had. If we had a 11/16, we'd probably be using that, but we don't have one. We've only got a 5/8. Then we'll go ahead and we'll taper the tie rod end. Of course, the biggest thing in all of this, make sure you taper it the right way. Tape it the wrong way, well, that would just suck and you're gonna have to start over. So pay close attention to that. All right, so we've got that taper now into there. So what we've done was we've basically tapered it down, and we went and grabbed the castle nut until you can kind of see the hole is at the very bottom of the castle nut. You know, we're going to pull that up into there still, probably a little bit more, but not a ton more. So you want it tapered at least, so you can make sure that you get the cotter pin in. And you can also, again, check that you are pretty well completely, you know, the full surface here. Let me get it apart. Come on. Yeah, the full surface here is basically up in that taper, which is really what you want. You want to make sure you get all of that surface up in there. So now we'll just need to move on to the pitman arm. Then we can go back and start talking about the tubes. Well, unfortunately for the pitman arm, we were able to drill the pitman arm out again to 5/8 on the drill press, but because of the drop in the pitman arm, we aren't able to chuck it up. So we're going to have to do this with a manual drill and some thread cutting oil. One recommendation when you're doing this is to use a battery powered drill instead of a corded drill. The reason being, I don't want my arm ripped off every time it catches, and it's going to catch quite a bit. Now that we've got our tie rod ends ready to go, a couple of questions I see come up. One is, how do you know where to set your tie rod end bung here for the tube? So what we will do is we'll look at how much of this is threaded. Now on these, basically just this hex portion is threaded. Now in the worst case scenario, I would want to have that full threads basically engaging with the tie rod end. So what I'll do is I'll take and I'll run the jam nut all the way down. I will take you can barely see it probably down in there. Take the bung, basically run it down to where the end of the threads is flush with the end of the tie rod end, and then measure it, and it's about 1 inch. So that means that I'm going to go ahead and take and put that now in the middle. And part of this is that it'll rely on you getting good measurements when you get down there and get it set up, the suspension set up. But then I'm basically just going to go ahead and put about a 1/2 inch of space in there. That way I know I have a 1/2 inch to go one way or the other. Now I'll do that with the smallest tie rod end. And then when you get to some of those longer tie rod ends, you're going to have maybe a whole lot more threads. You just want to make sure on those you have at least a 1/2 inch, if not more. If you've got a much longer thread, you can add an extra 1/8 to it, not to worry, but you're not going to end up tightening it down any more than a 1/2 inch, because you only have a 1/2 inch of space on this. So we will now go ahead and move on talking about tube a little bit. On the tubing, now for this specifically, this says 1 inch OD on that bung, so we need tubing with 1 inch ID. What we're going to recommend is we recommend a DOM tubing. Now if you're going to be doing a lot of heavy wheeling, especially in areas with rocks, we'll recommend something like this, a DOM tube with a 1/4 inch wall, got a 1 inch ID, so that's 1.5 inches OD. Of course, I grabbed the wrong end. You know, slides in there really nice. Get a really nice fillet weld. Now, DOM tubing means that it's drawn over manual, means there is no seam on the inside. We do recommend using DOM over something like hot rolled electrically welded, where that tube is, you know, more of the standard tube you see. That tube will have a seam on the inside, will have a weld on the inside. It is not as strong as DOM tubing, and chances are that weld is going to interfere with your ability to basically slide that in to where it's really nice and tight. So anyway, what we can also do is we can also, if we're not going to be doing a lot of heavy wheeling, 7 gauge 3/16 tubing wall could be used as well. Probably wouldn't go any smaller than that, because you really do want to get a good weld here, so you want a fairly substantial tube. With tie rod ends now installed, we can talk about a couple more things. What we've done is you can see we've put a couple of plates on the knuckles, a couple bars, so that we could measure from knuckle to knuckle to get the track lined up, or the toe set up. Now, we just set it up pretty much to where it's just you know, dead even front to rear. Obviously, it'll toe in some once we go and we do work on our alignment, but for setting it up now that'll work. Now, this tube isn't what we're going to use in the long run. We don't have the DOM tube that we want to use here, so we've got some on order that's just temporary, so we can work on the rest of this suspension. You can see a couple things you can check now. We can obviously see that we've got our Pitman arm tie rod, our other tie rod there. We can see that we're not exactly parallel with the track bar. We do want it as parallel as possible, but the track bar has adjustment on both ends that we went ahead and just put it in the middle just to see where we fell out. Now, we are pretty good on the length, our length of our track bar and our length of our drag link pretty much matched, so that's good. Right now we're pretty much set up to where we can start working on the rest of the sway bar lengths and try to figure out how we're going to fit those in there around everything else. On to the next section here, which is getting this sway bar set up. As we get more and more things packed onto this axle, things get tighter and tighter, so it gets to be more and more difficult trying to find how you're going to place things. So with the sway bar, we did end up taking a little bit off of this bar, about 3 inches, partially because we're worried about the turning radius, and as the larger tires we're going to have on this Jeep turns, whether the front, this would actually, you know, maybe get into the front of the tire there. We didn't want that to happen. Now, then right now we've also got to work around the upper track bar mount, which, being that we're probably going to end up moving this to the upper hole, we'll probably go ahead and make some additional room there. Then as we get to the other side, you know, here we've got to work around the lower track bar mount. The biggest thing, you know, for us, well, there's a couple things, you know, we're taking into consideration right now. In the end, we really want this bar to be parallel. We do know that as we put some more weight on the Jeep, it's probably going to push down some. So for now, we just kind of set it up to where it's slanted downward a little bit to start to give us a location to mount. Now, we're going to want to make sure that this whole location is the same on this side and on that. It's going to be tricky though, because it's going to be two completely different brackets. So we'll lay those out with some cardboard, get those cut out, and then come back and take a look. Now we've got everything tacked in place for the sway bar. You can see we end up with the bracket quite a ways out. Now, you might ask, you know, of course, it maybe would have been nice to get farther back in there, but when we look at the other side, you'll see why we are that far out. Because you see we barely have clearance here between the lower track bar mount and the sway bar link, but this should work out well here. I don't think we'd be comfortable with it any closer, but it should work out well with it. Now in this position, basically this hole on the axle is the same height and the same distance from the axle tube. These arms are parallel to each other. So now on the sway bar system, all we've got to do is go up here and connect it to the bar, and we'll be finished. So for the next and final system on this front axle, we've got to take a look and figure out how we're going to put some bump stops on this. So let's take a look at what we purchased. Well, here's what we're using for bump stops. We got the Pro Fender bump stop 2.0, 4 inches of travel. We wanted something that was a little bit better than just, you know, your standard urethane or something hard bump stop, something that would be a little bit more progressive. So we went with these. They came with these mounting cups here. So right now, really the biggest issue with this is just figuring out how do we get those placed down there in that suspension system. We've already got so much right around that area. Now we've looked at this bump stop setup here for a lot longer than we had hoped. Mainly trying to figure out how do we fit it in here. Actually would have liked to put it up here at the front, but unfortunately got that track bar mount at the front, so it just doesn't, we can't really fit it inside of this area here just due to the coilovers. And I know, like right now, it probably looks like there's a lot of space there, but the thing you really got to look at when you're, you know, setting up the bump stops is you've got to set it up and then you've got to check it both compressed and extended, because when it extends, this coilover swings quite a ways back. I mean, we get back up into here. Originally, I actually wanted to put this kind of right in there, which, you know, with it compressed looks great. However, with the movement of the coilover, it actually would push the spring right over into those bolts, so that won't work. So we've got to basically come back here, which, you know, isn't a huge deal. The biggest thing with moving it this far back is we've got it a good probably 3 inches off of the axle tube, so we're going to have to build a fair amount of structure down here at the bottom for it to come up and hit the bump stop. You know, but that shouldn't be a massive issue. You know, we can tie it into our lower control arm mounting here and just, you know, make all of that all the stronger. But it is one of those things that, you know, as you get more and more designed into the suspension, it gets more difficult to get everything in there to fit. And then you can see kind of on this front plate with the hole down here, that's actually going to be for our limiting strap. So kind of hopefully killing a little bit of two birds with one stone for that upper bracket, but, you know, is what it is. All right, we've got our upper bump stop now mounted. We've also built the lower pad that the bump stop is actually going to hit the bump stop. Now, when you are going and setting up a vehicle like this with a lot of travel, what we had to do is we actually had to raise this up on this side to where we basically think the top of our bump would be at, and then raise and lower the other side through its full suspension travel so that we could get a feel for how wide this pad needed to be. You know, we're actually, you know, quite a bit wider, one, because we tied into the outside of this lower control arm mount, and two, because we wanted to add another gusset over here because we have now integrated our limiting straps as well into both of the upper and the lower control, or the lower mounts for the bump stops, so that we've got that basically squared away as we move forward. Now, I think we're pretty much going to end the video here. We're waiting on our DOM tube. The tube's not going to be here for at least another week, but in general, everything is, for the most part, beyond that, tacked up, ready to get welded. So our next step is going to be pulling this all apart, solid welding everything, then rebuilding this axle with all the new parts we have, getting it painted, and starting to work on the exhaust and the rear and a whole bunch of more things to come in the future. So if you're interested in this and this was something that you liked, please check out our videos in the future. We'll try to do several more of these. And then if you're interested in what this looks like at the end when it's all finished, we will be doing some videos at the end just to show you all of the different systems in the Jeep and how it turned out. So thank you for watching. And as always, a like or subscribe is greatly appreciated.